January 14th, 1943. The heat on Guadalcanal is not just a temperature. It is a physical weight pressing down on the men of the 132nd Infantry Regiment. The air smells of rotting vegetation, cordite, and fear. Somewhere in the dense, tangled canopy above, Japanese snipers are tied to the branches, invisible and lethal. Down in the mud, American squads are firing blindly, their M1 Garands and BARs chewing up the foliage, but hitting nothing. The volume of fire is deafening, yet the American casualties keep mounting. Amidst the chaos of semi-automatic fire, one man operates with a jarringly slow rhythm. Lieutenant John B. George is not holding a standard-issue military weapon. He shoulders a Winchester Model 70, a polished walnut stock, blued steel, and a civilian Lyman hunting scope. To the grimy soldiers around him, it looks like a toy, a mail-order sweetheart, better suited for shooting deer in Ohio than fighting the Imperial Japanese Army. They mock the weapon as fragile and out of place. But then, George stops moving. He spots a subtle disturbance in the leaves 300 yards away. He exhales. A single distinct crack rings out, utterly different from the war around it. A body tumbles from the banyan tree, and suddenly, the mockery in the American line turns into a desperate need to understand how a civilian sporting rifle just did what 1,000 machine guns could not. By January 1943, the Battle of Guadalcanal has evolved from a desperate beachhead defense into a grinding, miserable offensive into the island's interior. 6 months of combat have transformed the tropical paradise into a landscape of rotting mud and jagged coral. The United States Marines, who initially stormed the island in August 1942, are being relieved by Army units, including the American Division and the 25th Infantry Division. But the Japanese defenders are not fading away. They have dug into the ridges and ravines surrounding Mount Austin and the Matanikau River, creating a labyrinth of fortified caves and concealed spider holes. The strategic initiative has shifted to the Americans, but the terrain fights for the Japanese. The specific sector facing the 132nd Infantry Regiment is a nightmare of vertical geography and suffocating vegetation. This is not the open warfare of Europe or the deserts of North Africa. Here, visibility is measured in feet, sometimes inches. The jungle canopy weaves together so tightly that it creates a perpetual twilight on the forest floor, masking the enemy in deep shadow. In this environment, the standard American doctrine of overwhelming firepower hits a wall. Artillery shells burst harmlessly in the high branches, and mortar rounds are swallowed by the mud. The war has become personal, intimate, and claustrophobic. The primary psychological weapon of the Japanese forces in this sector is the sniper. These are not snipers in the traditional European sense, men moving freely to take high-value shots at officers. These are suicide soldiers. They tie themselves into the crowns of banyan trees, or bury themselves in root systems with only a narrow firing slit exposed. They are supplied with weeks of rations and ordered to remain motionless until an American patrol passes directly beneath them. They do not expect to survive. Their objective is to delay, to terrify, and to bleed the American advance one man at a time. For the GIS on the ground, the threat is omnipresent. A soldier bends down to tie a bootlace and is shot through the neck. A radio operator raises his handset and takes a bullet in the chest. The source of the fire is never seen. The muzzle flash is hidden by smokeless powder and dense leaves. The sound is scattered by the ravine walls, making it impossible to triangulate the shooter's position. The response from the American lines is typically a frantic volume of fire. A platoon will unleash thousands of rounds into the surrounding trees, stripping the bark and shredding the vines, but hitting nothing. They are fighting a phantom. The morale of the 132nd Infantry is beginning to fracture under the strain of an enemy that cannot be seen, cannot be heard until it is too late, and cannot be suppressed by standard infantry rifles. Into this tactical deadlock steps Lieutenant John B. George. He is an anomaly in the 132nd Infantry. Unlike many of the conscripts who learn to shoot during basic training, George is a master marksman from civilian life. Before the war, he was a competitive shooter, deeply immersed in the culture of precision rifle matches in the United States. He understands ballistics, windage, and the mechanics of accuracy in a way that the standard Army manual does not cover. When he deployed to the Pacific, he did not trust his life solely to the mass-produced government-issue weaponry. He brought his own. The weapon he carries is a Winchester Model 70, chambered in the standard .30-06 Springfield cartridge. In 1943, this rifle is arguably the finest bolt-action sporting rifle in existence, revered by big game hunters for its smooth action and trigger crispness. Crucially, George has mounted a telescopic sight on it, a Lyman Alaskan 2.5 power scope. At a time when the U.S. Army's sniper program is practically non-existent, relying on hastily modified M1903 Springfields with fragile fog-prone optics, George's personal rifle represents a leap in capability. It is a precision instrument in a war of blunt force. However, the military hierarchy is rigid. In the eyes of the Army logistics and command structure, a non-standard weapon is a liability. It uses standard ammunition, but it does not take the standard 8-round en-bloc clip of the M1 Garand, nor does it allow for the rapid semi-automatic fire that American infantry doctrine prizes. The M1 Garand is designed to win battles through fire superiority, putting more lead in the air than the enemy. A bolt-action hunting rifle is viewed as an obsolete relic, a vanity project for an officer who thinks he is still at a shooting range in Ohio. As George moves up to the front lines near the Gifu strongpoint, the skepticism is palpable. Fellow officers and enlisted men eye the polished woodstock and the glass scope with a mix of amusement and disdain. They jokingly ask if he plans to hunt squirrels, while the rest of the battalion fights a war. To them, the mail-order rifle is a symbol of a man who doesn't understand the realities of combat. They believe that in the jungle, you need a machine gun, not a deer rifle. But the strategic reality is shifting. The Japanese defenders are dug in too well for machine guns to root them out. The volume of fire is failing. The American forces don't need to shoot more. They need to shoot better. The stage is set for a direct confrontation between two opposing philosophies of war. The industrial slaughter of the machine age and the cold, calculated precision of the hunter. To understand why Lieutenant George's presence on the line is so jarring, one must first understand the tool every other American soldier is holding: the M1 Garand. By 1943, the M1 is already being hailed as the rifle that will win the war. It is semi-automatic, robust, and capable of delivering 8 rounds of .30-06 ammunition as fast as a soldier can pull the trigger. It is a weapon designed for fire superiority, for suppressing an enemy squad with a wall of lead. But In the dense, light-starved jungles of Guadalcanal, the M1 Garand has a fatal flaw. It is a blunt instrument in a war that suddenly demands a scalpel. The standard issue iron sights on the M1 are thick, durable lumps of steel designed to survive drops and explosions. In the bright sun of a firing range, they work perfectly. But under the triple canopy jungle, where the light is dim even at noon, the rear peep sight becomes a murky black circle, and the front blade disappears against the dark green background of the foliage. A soldier trying to aim at a Japanese helmet peeking out of a spider hole at 200 yards is effectively guessing. He cannot see his sights, and he cannot clearly see his target. Furthermore, the M1's trigger is heavy and creeping, designed for safety in the chaos of battle, not for the hair trigger precision required to hit a grapefruit-sized target at distance. Contrast this with the weapon resting in Lieutenant George's hands. The Winchester Model 70 is a civilian masterpiece, uncompromised by military mass production standards. Its bolt action is slow, requiring a manual cycle for every shot, but this forces a discipline of fire that the semi-automatic M1 discourages. The trigger breaks like a glass rod, crisp, immediate, and predictable. But the true game changer is the glass. The Lyman Alaskan scope does not just magnify the target, it gathers light. In the gloom of the deep jungle, the optical lenses clarify the chaotic tangle of vines and leaves, allowing George to peer into the shadows rather than just looking at them. Where the infantryman sees a wall of green, George sees distinct shapes, textures, and, crucially, anomalies. The enemy George is hunting operates on a psychological plane that is alien to the Western mind. The Japanese snipers on Guadalcanal are not elite marksmen in the traditional European sense. They are not the highly trained specialists of the German Wehrmacht moving from hide to hide. They are often regular infantrymen, or even light machine gunners who have been ordered to stay behind as the main force retreats. Their doctrine is known as Nikuhaku, human bullet. It is a doctrine of total sacrifice. These snipers do not construct escape routes. They climb high into the massive banyan trees or burrow into the root systems at the base of ridges, and then they are tied in. They use ropes to lash their bodies to the branches, so that even if they are killed, they will not fall, leaving the Americans unsure if the shooter is dead or simply waiting. They are equipped with bags of rice, water, and ammunition, prepared to wait for days in their own filth for a target to present itself. Their weapon, the Arisaka Type 38 or Type 99, is particularly suited for this ambush warfare. It uses a long barrel and a relatively small powder charge, which produces almost no muzzle flash and very little smoke. This smokeless capability is devastating in the jungle. When a German Mauser fires, there is a visible puff of white smoke that betrays the position. When an Arisaka fires, there is only the crack of the supersonic bullet. The American squads on the ground are fighting a ghost. They hear the shot. They see a man fall, but the jungle reveals nothing. The Japanese sniper's goal is not necessarily to kill the most men, but to freeze the entire unit in terror. A single sniper in a tree can pin down a company of 150 men for hours, forcing them to crawl in the mud, draining their morale and delaying the advance. This is the asymmetry of Guadalcanal. One man prepared to die can paralyze 100 men who desperately want to live. Beyond the visual obscurity, the geography of the Point Cruz sector creates a distinct acoustical hell. The terrain is a series of razor-backed ridges and deep, steep-walled ravines. When a rifle is fired in this environment, the sound does not travel in a straight line. It slams into the canyon walls, ricochets off the dense mat of hardwood trees, and scatters in every direction. For a standard infantry squad, this renders the traditional crack-thump method of locating fire useless. Normally, a soldier listens for the supersonic crack of the bullet passing by, followed by the distant thump of the muzzle blast to triangulate the shooter. Here, the crack is everywhere, and the thump is swallowed by the mud or fractured into a dozen confusing echoes. A platoon can take fire from the north, swear it is coming from the west, and return fire into an empty hillside, while the sniper continues to pick them off from above. The technology of the era, radios, mortars, heavy machine guns, relies on knowing where the enemy is. Without that data, the American war machine is paralyzed, flailing blindly against an enemy who used the jungle's acoustics as a shield. This paralysis breeds frustration, and that frustration finds a target in Lieutenant George. As he prepares to move into the line, the mockery from his fellow soldiers is not just good-natured ribbing. It is a manifestation of military dogma. The U.S. Army is an institution built on uniformity. Every man wears the same boots, eats the same rations, and fires the same rifle. To deviate is to be suspect. Officers look at George's Winchester, a weapon they associate with wealthy civilians on safari, and see arrogance. They see a toy that belongs in a gun cabinet, not in the mud of the Solomons. There is a tangible tension in the command post. The brass believes in volume of fire. They believe that the solution to a hidden sniper is to call in a mortar, barrage, or a sweeping machine gun assault. The idea that one man, lying prone in the dirt with a bolt-action rifle, can achieve what a heavy weapons platoon cannot, is viewed as professional heresy. George is not just fighting the Japanese, he is fighting the entrenched skepticism of his own army. He knows that if he misses, if his mail-order sweetheart jams or fails, the ridicule will be merciless. But John George possesses a psychological advantage that the skeptics do not understand. He is not thinking like a soldier. A soldier is trained to capture ground, to assault, to move forward. A hunter is trained to wait. George strips away the military urgency that drives the infantry. He shifts his consciousness from the frantic pace of combat to the slow, meditative rhythm of the stalk. He knows that the Japanese sniper is playing a game of camouflage. The enemy is mimicking the jungle, wearing nets of woven grass, painting his face with mud, moving only when the wind blows the branches. To defeat him, George must become a part of the environment himself. He stops looking for a man. Instead, he looks for the anomalies. A branch that hangs at a slightly wrong angle. A patch of moss that is too dark. A lack of birdsong in a specific tree. This is the mindset of the counter-sniper. It requires a suppression of the survival instinct. While others keep their heads down to stay alive, George must lift his head to see. He accepts the terrifying reality that define the hidden killer. He must first offer himself as a target, trusting his eyes and his glass to win the duel before the enemy pulls the trigger. The time for debate is over. The patrol is pinned down, the skepticism is silenced by the sound of incoming fire, and the hunt begins. It is mid-morning, January 15th, 1943. The sun has burned through the morning mist, turning the jungle into a steam bath. Near the base of the Seahorse Ridge, a platoon from the 132nd is pinned flat against the mud. Every time a helmet rises, a 6.5mm bullet snaps through the air. The Japanese sniper is invisible, burying the Americans under a blanket of fear. The lieutenant in charge is screaming for mortar support, but the canopy is too thick. Into this paralysis slides Lieutenant George. He does not run. He moves with a deliberate, predatory slowness. He finds a position behind the roots of a massive hardwood tree, bracing the Winchester Model 70 against the bark. He wipes the sweat from his eyes, checks the Lyman Alaskan scope for fog, and settles the stock into his shoulder. The world narrows down to a 2.5 power circle of green. For 20 minutes, he does not move. The infantrymen around him are restless, whispering, waiting for him to do something, anything. But George is scanning. He is dissecting the jungle grid by grid. He ignores the obvious foliage and looks for the subtle betrayals of nature. He sees a cluster of vines 50 yards up a slope. To the naked eye, it is just undergrowth. To the magnified, light-gathering lens of the scope, something is wrong. The vines are too straight. They are taut, as if tied. He traces the line of the vines back to a spider hole, a small excavated pit beneath the root system of a banyan tree, covered with a lid of woven grass. The lid is raised 3 inches. In that darkness, a pair of eyes is watching the American line. George controls his breathing. He applies pressure to the trigger, a smooth glass break snap that is foreign to military rifles. The Winchester kicks. The report is a sharp, authoritative crack, distinct from the mechanical clatter-bang of the Garands. Up on the slope, the grass lid flips backward. A Japanese helmet rolls out of the hole, followed by the limp arm of the sniper. The American platoon stares in stunned silence. There was no barrage, no machine gun traverse, just one shot. George cycles the bolt, the brass casing spinning into the mud, and chambers another round. He does not celebrate. He knows that where there is one, there are others. Over the next 96 hours, the Point Cruz sector becomes a hunting ground. The dynamic of the battle shifts fundamentally. George is no longer a curiosity. He is a tactical asset. He moves from sector to sector, lending his rifle to whichever platoon is pinned down. The mockery has evaporated, replaced by a reverence usually reserved for chaplains or medics. When George arrives, the soldiers stop firing. They understand now that their noise only masks the targets. They give him silence, and he gives them results. On the 3rd day, the heat is blistering. George is tracking a sniper tied high in the canopy, a tree-sitter who has wounded 2 runners. This target is disciplined, firing only when artillery shells land to mask the sound of his rifle. George waits for 45 minutes, sweat stinging his eyes, tracking the sway of the branches. He notices a heavy limb that is not moving in sync with the wind. The Japanese sniper has lashed himself so tight that his weight is dampening the branch's natural sway. George centers the crosshairs on the thickest part of the foliage, mass. He anticipates the wind, holds slightly left, and fires. A form plummets from the canopy, crashing through the lower branches before hitting the jungle floor with a sickening thud. The rifle lashed to the body is a scoped Arisaka, a rare find indicating a high-value target. By the end of the 4th day, the tally is brutal and precise. George has engaged 13 distinct targets. 11 are confirmed kills. These are not random pot shots. They are surgical removals of the enemy's most effective psychological weapons. The Japanese defense in the sector begins to unravel. Deprived of their eyes and their terror weapons, the Japanese infantry are forced to engage in conventional firefights, where the American volume of fire finally has the advantage. The paralyzing fear that gripped the 132nd Infantry lifts. Men stand up. They advance up the ridges that days ago were death zones. The mail order rifle has cleared the way. The silence that descends on the Point Cruz sector after January 18th is heavy, but it is no longer menacing. The patrols of the 132nd Infantry move with a new cadence. They are still cautious, still weary, but the paralyzing dread of the invisible death has lifted. The scorecard is officially tallied. In 4 days of hunting, Lieutenant John George has confirmed 11 kills. 11 Japanese snipers who had pinned down entire companies and bled the regiment of its confidence are dead. The impact is immediate and visceral. The soldiers who had laughed at the mail order sweetheart now crowd around George, asking to see the rifle, to look through the Lyman scope. The mockery has completely inverted. The weapon is now a talisman. Reports filter up the chain of command, detailing how a single marksman with a bolt-action rifle cleared a sector that machine guns could not. George writes his own after-action assessments, not with the dry language of a bureaucrat, but with the detailed technical observations of a ballistician. He notes the failure of the Japanese to relocate after firing, their over-reliance on camouflage over cover, and, crucially, the absolute necessity of optical magnification in jungle warfare. The immediate tactical victory is clear. The 132nd pushes forward, securing the Gifu strongpoint and helping to break the back of the Japanese resistance on Guadalcanal. But the psychological victory is profound. George proved that the Japanese sniper was not a ghost or a demon. He was just a man in a tree with a rifle, and he could be hunted. John George does not retire to a desk job after Guadalcanal. His war is only beginning. The success of his methods propels him into the elite 5,307th Composite Unit, Provisional, better known as Merrill's Marauders. In the brutal campaigns of Burma, George continues to refine his theories on light infantry and precision fire, carrying his philosophy of the civilian hunter into the deepest jungles of Asia. However, the institutional lesson is harder to learn. Despite George's undeniable success, the U.S. Army is slow to pivot. The cult of volume fire remains dominant. The M1 Garand remains the king, and the concept of a dedicated, specialized sniper program languishes until the Korean and Vietnam Wars force a re-evaluation. Yet, George's legacy survives in print. His book, Shots Fired in Anger, becomes a seminal text. It is not just a war memoir. It is a technical manual on how to survive and win against an entrenched enemy. Decades later, the principles George demonstrated on Guadalcanal, the superiority of bolt-action precision, the necessity of high-quality optics, and the discipline of the hunter mindset, become the foundational pillars of modern sniper doctrine. The Winchester Model 70 he carried becomes a legend in its own right, the precursor to the Marine Corps adopting the bolt-action Winchester Model 70 in Vietnam, famously used by Carlos Hathcock. The mail-order rifle was not a step backward. It was a glimpse into the future of warfare. In the industrial grinder of World War II, where victory was often calculated in tonnage of bombs dropped and millions of rounds fired, the story of Lieutenant John George stands as a quiet, precise counterpoint. It is a reminder that technology, no matter how advanced, cannot replace human skill. The U.S. Army tried to conquer the jungle with volume. George conquered it with patience. His mail-order rifle was not just a weapon. It was a statement. It declared that even in the age of the machine gun, the individual marksman, cold, calculating, and precise, still held the power to turn the tide of battle. The mockery of his peers did not survive the first shot. By the time the smoke cleared over Point Cruz, the lesson was etched into the history of the 132nd Infantry. In the chaos of war, the loudest weapon is not always the deadliest. Sometimes the most terrifying sound on the battlefield is the silence of a hunter waiting for you to move. The jungle has long since reclaimed the foxholes and spider holes of Guadalcanal. The echoes of the artillery have faded, but the legacy of the civilian who went to war with his deer rifle remains, a testament to the fact that innovation often looks like obsolescence until the moment the trigger is pulled.